The old Regal Theater had stood for over a century, its faded red curtains and dim chandeliers holding echoes of performances long past. But what lingered backstage was not just history, something else refused to leave. For years, actors and stagehands spoke in hushed whispers about the voices. Murmurs that slithered through the darkness behind the stage. Voices that didn't belong to anyone living. Some brushed it off as superstition, but those who spent enough time backstage knew the truth. Something was there, watching, whispering. When Lisa, a passionate young actress, landed the lead role in a highly anticipated play, she dismissed the rumors. Ghost stories didn't scare her. She was too focused on her big break. But that was before she heard the whispers herself. It started subtly. The first night of rehearsals, as she practiced alone on stage, she heard it, a faint, urgent whisper from the wings. "Come here, please." Lisa froze, her heart hammering. She turned to the shadows behind the curtain, but there was no one there. The stage manager had already left, and the janitor was mopping in the lobby. She shook it off as exhaustion, but then it happened again, and again. Each night, the whispers grew bolder. Sometimes, it was soft giggling like children playing in the dark. Other times, it was a desperate plea, a voice right next to her ear, but when she turned, nothing. Then came the night of the first dress rehearsal. The theater was mostly empty, just a few crew members adjusting lights, the director taking notes. Lisa stood center stage, delivering her lines, when she felt it, a breath on the back of her neck. Cold, icy, a slow exhale. She spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance, but there was no one behind her. The stage was empty, but as she stood there, her pulse pounding, she saw something in the dim glow of the stage lights. It shifted behind the curtain, tall, unmoving. Watching, Lisa's breath hitched. Her fingers trembled at her sides. She stepped forward, her voice shaky. "Who's there?" Silence. Then, a whisper, right in her ear. "It's not your turn to speak." Lisa screamed, stumbling back, her cry echoing through the empty theater. The crew rushed to her side, but no one else had seen or heard anything. That night, she begged the director to let her quit, but the show was days away from opening, and she was too valuable to replace. Against her instincts, she stayed. On opening night, the theater was packed. The energy was electric, and for a moment, Lisa almost forgot the whispers, the shadows. She told herself it was just her imagination. But then, as the final act approached, she stepped into the darkness of the backstage area, waiting for her cue. The dim glow of the work lights barely reached the heavy curtains. That's when she saw them, standing between the racks of old costumes and dusty props, their shapes barely visible in the shadows. Lisa's breath hitched. She wanted to scream, but terror sealed her throat. Then they moved, gliding soundlessly closer, their faces twisted, hollow, mouths moving but making no sound. And then the whispers came, a chorus of voices, overlapping, crawling under her skin. "You took our stage. It was ours first. Sing for us. Dance for us. Stay with us." A cold hand brushed her arm. Lisa shrieked and ran, bursting onto the stage. She was blinded by the bright lights, the audience gasping at her terrified expression. The whispers stopped. She finished the play, shaken, drenched in sweat. When the curtains fell, she ran. She didn't bother collecting her things. She never set foot in the Regal Theater again. The play went on for another month, but something was different. Every night, the actors and crew reported the same thing. Strange whispers from the wings, shadows shifting where no one stood, and the stage light? It always flickered when it was time for Lisa's scene, as if something or someone was still waiting for her return. The Everett Grand Theater had once been a place of beauty, its golden chandeliers glowing above lavish performances, its grand stage welcoming the most talented artists. But now it stood old, forgotten, cursed. They said the theater had a spirit, a presence that lingered long after the curtains had fallen. A dancer, a woman lost in time, trapped in an endless performance. For decades, night watchmen and wandering strangers claimed to see her, a figure dressed in white, spinning through the fog. Michael had heard the rumors. He didn't believe them, He was a young filmmaker scouting the Everett Grand for his next project. The theater had been abandoned for years. Yet as soon as he stepped inside, he felt it, the weight of something unseen. The air smelled of dust and faded memories. The grand stage stood before him, empty, lifeless. He sighed, clicking on his flashlight. Then he saw them. Footprints. Faint, delicate marks in the dust-covered floorboards leading to the center of the stage. A chill crawled up his spine. He wasn't alone. Hello? His voice echoed through the empty hall. Silence. Then music. Soft. Faint. A distant piano playing from nowhere. Michael turned, his breath caught in his throat. The fog had begun to creep in from the broken windows above, swirling across the stage like ghostly fingers. Then she appeared, a woman in white, dancing. Her movements were fluid, mesmerizing, her feet barely touching the ground. Her pale dress drifted through the mist as if she were floating. Michael's pulse pounded. He stepped back, his instincts screaming at him to leave. But he couldn't move. He couldn't look away. The dancer twirled, her arms reaching toward the sky, and then she turned to face him, her eyes hollow, sunken, lifeless. Her lips parted. "Why did you stop the music?" The words slithered into his ears, but her mouth didn't move. Michael's breath hitched. He stumbled back, his flashlight flickering in his shaking hands. "No, no, no," he muttered, forcing his legs to move. But the fog thickened. It swirled around him, wrapping around his limbs like icy hands. The dancer took a step closer, then another. Her pale arms reached for him. The whispers began. "Dance with me. Finish the performance. Stay with me." Michael turned and ran. He bolted through the aisles, the whispers following him, chasing him. He reached the doors, but they wouldn't budge. He slammed his fists against the wood, his breath ragged. Then, silence. He turned. The fog had cleared. The music had stopped. The stage was empty. The footprints in the dust were gone. Michael staggered back, gasping. He clawed at the door, and this time, it flew open. He didn't stop running until he was outside, the cold night air burning his lungs. He never returned, but those who did, they still see her. On cold nights, when the fog rolls in, the Everett Grand Theater comes alive once more. And in the center of the stage, a woman in white twirls alone, waiting for her next partner. The Crestwood Theater had been abandoned for decades, its once glamorous halls now filled with dust and decay. But the locals still whispered about it, about the films that played when no one was there. They said the projector room was cursed, that the old projectionist, Harold Grayson, had never left. Nathan, a freelance photographer, thought it was all nonsense. He was hired to take pictures of the theater before renovations began. A quick job, in and out. But as he stepped inside, something felt wrong. The stale air carried the faint scent of burned film. The empty seats stretched into the darkness, facing a torn screen that had not lit up in years. Nathan swallowed hard, brushing off the creeping unease. Then, from above, a sound, a faint whirring, clicking. Nathan's head snapped up. The projector room. That was impossible. There was no power in the building. Slowly, he climbed the creaky stairs, each step echoing through the silent theater. The door to the projector room was slightly ajar. Cold air seeped through the gap. Nathan's breath fogged in the dim light. He pushed the door open. The room was empty. The old projector stood in the center, its reels covered in dust. But it was running. The film spun through the wheels, clicking softly as an image flickered on the screen below. Nathan's stomach knotted. How? He peered through the glass window, his eyes widening. The screen showed a black and white film of the very same theater. Rows of filled seats, an audience watching something. But the theater was empty. There was no one down there. Nathan's breath hitched. Then movement. One by one, the heads of the shadowy audience turned toward the projector room. Nathan stumbled back. His pulse hammered as cold sweat dripped down his spine. And then a voice. Low, raspy, right behind him. "Do you like the show?" Nathan spun around. A figure stood in the corner. An old man in a burnt, tattered uniform. His face was barely visible in the dim light, but his eyes hollow, dark pits. The temperature dropped. Nathan's fingers trembled as he reached for the door. You're sitting in my seat?" Nathan's blood ran cold. The figure lunged. The room plunged into darkness. Nathan screamed. He clawed at the door, wrenching it open and stumbling down the stairs. He didn't dare look back. He ran through the rows of empty seats, through the lobby, bursting into the cold night air. The theater was silent once more. The projector had stopped. Nathan never spoke about what happened that night. But the workers who entered the theater after him, they found something in the projector room. A film reel. When they played it, the footage was of a man, Nathan, standing frozen in the projector room, with a shadowy figure looming behind him, waiting, watching, and grinning.